Hi, I'm Don from DonDronesOn. The Drone Pilot Association of Canada's Steering Committee has completed a draft response to Transport Canada's new regulations proposal and would like your feedback before submitting it to TC. The full position paper document is available for download from the DPAC website. But in this video, I'll zero in on the really important messages we want to get across. Let's get into it. So if you haven't already heard, Transport Canada has proposed several major changes to the RPAS regulations and has asked for public feedback by September 22nd, 2023. I have a full video on the changes, so please start there if you haven't already done so. TC is accepting feedback in the form of email or, what they prefer, direct online comments in their document. They've also organized several online Q&A sessions. All of these resources with links are listed in the description under this video, so please have a look there. We have a lot of feedback in our 7-page DPAC position paper, and to delve into each little bit would take a very long time. Instead, I'm going to focus on the 6 key elements and let you read all the other stuff yourself. But I do encourage you to read it and provide us feedback. We talk about changes to the safety assurance standards to allow large-scale models to be approved without destructive testing. We propose putting the medical checkup requirement for VLOS flights on the back burner, at least for now. We talk about allowing foreign pilots more reasonable access to flying drones in Canada, eliminating the draconian alcohol and cannabis restrictions, and much, much more. But again, I really only want to focus on the 6 important topics in this video. Let's start with the new extended VLOS proposal. This rule allows an advanced RPAS pilot to operate their drone up to 3.7 kilometers away and out of visual line of sight. But in order to do this, they must have a visual observer who can see the airspace where the drone is operating. And this spotter must also be an advanced RPAS pilot. So DPAC certainly gives this new capability a thumbs up, 2 thumbs up. It will greatly assist people doing already safe operations just out of VLOS. And it recognizes that folks who have gone to all the trouble of attaining their advanced certification are safety-oriented already and very capable of ensuring their flights aren't putting people at risk. It is also an important sign that Transport Canada acknowledges that the "thou shalt not fly beyond visual line of sight" rule, well, it isn't quite cast in concrete. That said, DPAC has offered some practical suggestions to improve the rule. Firstly, we don't think there's any good reason that the spotter should need their advanced pilot certification. Sure, they need to be trained on what they need to do, and probably having their basic drone pilot certification would help. But this really isn't rocket science. If you see a plane, let the drone pilot know right away. The spotter does not need to have their advanced RPAS pilot certification in order to do that simple job effectively. Secondly, it's time to allow visual observers to use binoculars or other aids from time to time during their duties. What's with this weird prohibition in the spotter rules that you must use unaided sight? Is this something buried in the Geneva Convention? Let's get practical here. Binoculars should be allowed. They would help. Finally, let's see some further acknowledgement of the reality of flying drones safely. As long as the pilot has a clear line of sight to the airspace, the pilot, and it's not that far away, say 1 kilometer, let's agree that you don't really need that spotter at all. With these improvements, this rule kicks ass. It's still safe and blows the dust off of a lot of stuffiness in our regulations. Sheltered operations are another new rule being proposed. This one allows an advanced pilot to fly their drone behind a building or structure out of visual line of sight. as long as they stay close to the building. This is great, no question. But let's face it, this is really low risk. Why are we limiting this operation to advanced pilots? It should be opened up to both advanced and basic. The other weird thing about the proposal is that it specifically refers to buildings and structures as the obstructions, not trees, hills, or any other terrain. Why? Is Transport Canada worried that a tree obstruction could end up being an entire boreal forest? Well, that same kind of scale applies to large city blocks of buildings, or heck, an Amazon warehouse for that matter. Let's simply allow any kind of obstruction, but limit the range of the rule to something reasonable, like say 500 meters. And while we're on the subject of visual line of sight, DPAC is recommending something new, a new allowance for FPV flights. The current regulations require the use of a spotter if you're flying FPV with vision obscuring goggles. But the vast majority of FPV pilots out there are essentially breaking the law when flying solo. And yet, has public safety been affected by this? I don't think so. DPAC recommends that the 901.11 visual line of sight rule be amended to indicate that a spotter is not required when flying FPV, providing the following conditions are met during the flight. A, you stay at least 30 meters away from bystanders. B, you stay below 30 meters AGL and within 250 meters of the pilot. C, you have a reliable and continuous remote view from the onboard camera. And finally, D, you're always flying forwards in the direction the onboard camera is pointing. What do you think? Is this more reasonable than needing a spotter? Let us know. The fourth thing I want to bring to your attention is advertised events. And to be honest, I get really agitated by what they've added. Let me read out what they're proposing. They're sticking with requiring an SFOC for advertised events, which is another bit of overkill, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But here's the part that scares me. Subsection 1 does not apply to the operation of a remotely piloted aircraft system for the purpose of an operation to save human life, fine, a police operation, a firefighting operation, okay, or any other operation that is conducted in the service of a public authority. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not opposing first responder exemptions, but let's remind ourselves that the only two serious drone incidents, collisions with aircraft in Canada, ever have both been the fault of police drone operators, and neither collision had any need for urgency. So let's ask ourselves, first of all, why this exemption is only in the advertised events rule. Do we have a lot of fires during advertised events? And why does it say any other operation that is conducted in the service of a public authority? George Orwell is turning over in his grave at this one, because it basically says the police now have free rein to fly over crowds anytime they want. The DPAC position on this is to rip this proposal out and replace it with a more general first responder exemption that applies to all RPAS regulations, not just advertised events, but has two mandatory conditions. The purpose of the operation must be to save human life or to prevent the destruction of property. And secondly, there must be a need for exigency, in other words, urgency. I think with these two conditions, George might rest in peace. Okay, let me calm down a bit and talk about an easy one, fees. Transport Canada's justification for service fees is a reasonable one. If an individual or group is directly benefiting from a fairly narrow government service, they should be paying for at least part of the cost of providing that service. They call this the user pay principle. And in general, this sounds fair. But let's look at registration fees. They're proposing these jump from $5 per aircraft to $10 per aircraft. Why? Registration doesn't bring any benefit to the RPAS owner, so the user pay principle doesn't apply. If you do the sensible thing and put your phone number on your drone, you get a lot more bang for the buck than having a registration number on that drone. And that registration number means absolutely nothing to anyone finding your drone in their backyard. No, the registration fee should stay at $5. And honestly, there should probably be a fleet rate as well. SFOC Special Flight Operations Certificate Fees. They're proposing SFOCs be divided into two categories, low complexity and high complexity, with $150 fees and $2,000 fees respectively. By the way, first responders would not be required to pay. But Transport Canada is playing the user pay card again to justify these fee increases. In this case, honestly, the user pay notion is legit. There are benefits for those applying for the services, and so, yeah, they should pay. But here's the catch. DPAC contends that the advertised event requirement is entirely bogus. Advanced pilots with drones approved for flying over people should be allowed to do so. Qualified pilots with qualified drones. Why is there anything more that Transport Canada needs to do? Maybe issue a permit and maybe say that you need to have liability insurance. But otherwise, nothing. And the derogatory treatment of foreign pilots has got to go. So that eliminates both the low complexity SFOC categories. And on the high complexity side, the approval of flights over 122 meters, well, that should be transferred to NAV Canada. I mean, NAV Canada puts up immense NOTAMs for high altitude balloon flights. Look at this one, it covers all of Quebec. Why can't the same kind of process be applied to drones? By the way, they've quietly done the right thing for one other current SFOC requirement. In the proposal, flying near DND aerodromes requires DND authorization only, no longer an SFOC. Good idea. Our last really big piece of feedback on the proposals is something they missed: the opportunity to simplify the rules. The regulations are already complicated to the extent that even well-intentioned drone pilots have trouble consistently complying with them. In addition, the overly complex rules act as a hurdle for many recreational pilots, leading to non-compliance, either due to ignorance or just plain obstinance. I'm not following all those stupid rules. The regulations should be made simpler to avoid either of these scenarios. And yet, this iteration, well, it just adds to the complexity. Here are 9 rules that DPAC feels are overly prescriptive and overly complex, at least for drones under 25 kilograms. If TC wants to retain them for drones over 25 kilos, fill your boots. What we're proposing is to replace these rules with one new one, which we've dubbed situational awareness. The small RPA pilot must have full situational awareness by taking appropriate measures to both prepare for and execute a safe flight operation. The small RPA pilot must A. have sufficient knowledge of the airspace and physical environment, including people, for a safe operation. B. Take into account weather conditions in the area for the duration of the operation. C. Ensure the small RPA is in safe operating condition. D. Maintain a clear line of sight to the area of operation. And finally, be prepared for abnormal and emergency situations. All the details currently incorporated into the replaced regulations, these ones here, should be transferred into the AIM document as guidelines or maybe recommended best practices. For example, It should not be a criminal act to fly a drone in sub-zero weather in Canada. Not recommended, perhaps, but not criminal. And do we really need to follow detailed checklists for every flight? Definitely a best practice. But I should not feel guilty of breaking the law if I pop the drone up in my backyard to check the roof of my house. Wording like appropriate measures and sufficient knowledge means due diligence still needs to be applied, yet allows the judgment of the pilot to be applied to the situation. So there we have it, the 6 key messages in the DPAC position paper on the new Transport Canada regulations proposal. Improvements to the new extended VLOS rule, improvements to the new sheltered operations rule, a proposal to, decriminalize FPV flying, correcting the Orwellian advertised event exemption, keeping a rein on the fee increases, and a major proposal to simplify the regulations, situational awareness. DPAC is going to submit our position paper to Transport Canada right after the Labor Day weekend. If you like our feedback or have suggestions for further improvement, let me know as soon as possible. Just send me an email to DonDronesOn@gmail.com. The full draft position paper is on the DPAC website, right here. And if you're not already a member of DPAC, by the way, please take a moment and register. It's free. Our membership numbers make a big difference in being listened to by Transport Canada. Thanks for watching. Now let's enjoy a bit of wonderful we roll. B-roll with the spirit of we.